Derek, thank you so much for joining me. How have you been?
Very well, thank you, Nick. Yeah, doing well. Thank you for having me.
Nice. Yeah, of course, of course. And great to hear you're doing well. So we're jumping on this to talk about your new film that's coming out, or depending on the release date, may have already come out, called
Yes.
Sorority. So it's very much like an intimate familial drama about two
Mhm.
sisters and their mother and kind of their relationship. So how did you get involved in working on that film?
Yeah. Well, it's kind of the short history of how me and James Weber started working together. Um, we met when I actually said to one of my other close collaborators, Carl Mackenzie. I said to him, "Who do you think I should be working with?" And I think his number one name that he mentioned was James. So I sent James a message and said, do you fancy going for coffee? And we met up and we just sort of stayed in touch for a while. And I'm not sure how long after it was we made that initial contact, but we decided to work on a short horror film together that he was doing, which was this 3-minute supernatural horror called Hushy By, um, which is available to watch for free online. And uh, yeah, we did this like really creepy sort of 3-minute short, and the score was kind of all this. Uh, it was from my perspective, and actually the references that we discussed, it was very much like The Conjuring and
Mm.
some of those scores by Joseph Bishara. We were doing that kind of cacophonic orchestral stuff. So that was the first thing that we did together, and it was a really good experience working together. It went really, really smoothly. In fact, one of my favorite parts of it was that James sent me really tight storyboards with actual timings on it. So I was able
Interesting.
to write the score to the storyboards, and he played it on set to get the
Mm.
actors in, like, freak them out and get them in the mood. Um, so that was a real thrill for that. So yeah. Anyway, so we had this great experience working together on that score, and then I think James was already at the stage, by the time he made Hushy By, that there were features in the works. There was stuff that was in development, in various stages of development, and we discussed at least two other feature projects, I think. And we got quite far in the sort of the discussions, and there were times when it felt like one of the other one was going to happen. And then from my memory, Sorority actually kind of came out of nowhere,
Hmm.
and we hadn't discussed it at all. And then suddenly that was the film that was going to get made. And quite quickly after it was discussed, I think things were rolling. Sophie Kennedy Clark was involved very early on, um, to play Harriet, but also producing as well. And I think as a result of that, we were getting lots of doors opened quite quickly. So yeah, that's the short history of how I got involved with it.
And was there anything in particular that drew you to that project, or was it really just the culmination, as you mentioned, of you and James, the director, talking through
Mm.
different potential features in that one sort of popping up?
Yeah. Well. So when I got in touch with James initially, um, he sent me all of his films to watch, or certain films to watch. So I watched Driftwood, which stars Sam Gittins, who is also in Sorority, and I watched Driftwood. I watched Soror, which is the short that inspired Sorority. It's actually a very similar, essentially the same story, but in a short form, with some fundamental elements different. Also with Kate Dickey, and it was obvious that James is a very sensitive filmmaker, and that's really what I'm interested in, is stories with very nuanced character development. I just think, from my perspective, that creates the most interesting opportunities for my work. So although what we first went to work on was this 3-minute horror, which was it wasn't obviously tongue in cheek, but I suppose we were having fun with it. It wasn't as deep and serious a project as Sorority is. So although that was our testing ground, my eye was always on what are these dramas that James is going to make.
But I think it's so funny mentioning making a score that's like the reference point being Joseph Bashara, because
Yeah.
that style of just like dissonance and cacophony that it's grating and burrows into you is probably maybe literally the exact opposite of the style on Sorority, which is a much more airy, gentle, not quite ambient, but like an atmospheric style of music that those two couldn't be further apart. And obviously, it's fitting really well, but it is always just funny seeing that sort of disparity or range between projects.
Well, it's funny you say that, because I've never thought to compare them, but there are similarities in the way that I put the palettes together, and the way that I build atmosphere in the Sorority score, and the layering of different textures and timbres it's not methodically, it's not actually a million miles off from how I created Hushy By. It's just that the end effect on the viewer, on the audience, is very different.
Yeah. And
there's much more melody and harmony in Sorority, whereas Hushy By, there was none of that.
yeah. And I mean, on Sorority, there's the main kind of sisters theme or motif is very, very melodic. It often kind of comes through in this gentle, like slow piano melody that obviously wouldn't work in that type of piercing horror film and horror score.
No.
But the score is really interesting because of how it works in the film. It seems like throughout the film, every 10 or 15 minutes, there are these, be like a slow motion sequence or a montage or just something that's almost dreamlike that kind of exists in between scenes. That's like almost as if it's not real. And that's where the score comes in almost entirely. There are a few moments where it enters what I feel like is the real world of the film, especially at the end. But for the most part, it kind of exists in those in between moments. So, what was the process of determining what was actually going to be scored?
Yeah. Well, so we had a spotting session, myself and James and Michael Bates, the sound mixer, over at Michael's studio. And we just spent the whole day, ate a lot of croissants and pastries and coffee, and we just watched the film, and we paused and we took notes. And from I can't remember if at that stage we had already if James had already sent us some notes on where he expected the cues to be, and we were working from that to sort of go in more detail. I can't quite remember that, although we did have a working document with both the sound design and the music notes side by side, and so I worked quite closely with Michael in order to ensure that we weren't stepping on each other's toes, basically, and we were making sure that we step out of each other's way at the right times. It was always clear that the slow motion sequences that had no dialogue would be full score. So the scene with the trolley was an obvious choice for score. A lot of the stuff shot at Hengistbury Head on the beach was quite obviously going to be thickly scored. So I imagine if James hadn't explicitly said that, I would have got the gist that those were going to be full score moments. And I get some of the more interesting choices, I suppose, is like the argument between Andrew and Harriet towards the beginning, and the score steps in at the end of the argument. So we have that one long take of them arguing, and I'm not doing anything there. I'm just letting them do that amazing sequence between the two of them. So we had this spotting session, and what I would do is we'd get to a certain section, I'd be watching something, and I would get a sense of a movement or a tone that I was going to bring, and then I would think of a reference that would make that clear. So for example, some of Johansson's work on the theory of everything came up as references,
Mm.
and it wasn't that we were trying. It wasn't like temping. We weren't going to use it as a temp track to sort of roughly emulate, but
Right.
it was kind of like, look, this is the kind of movement and rhythm that I'm thinking of here. Here's this track that demonstrates that, and that worked really, really well. And just I think that whole spotting session, we all feel it was one of the best experiences in terms of doing that process on a film. It just went so smoothly, and we had such a blast with it.
Interesting. And I do think that that's probably how, you know, temp or reference music is the most useful when you're boiling it down to the abstractions of, all right, what about this music, what aspect of it is useful, what do we want to pull out of it, rather than just saying, let's do something that sounds like this. But in terms of the spotting session, the process of scoring, it does sound like it was really collaborative, went really smoothly. But were there any roadblocks or challenges that came up during it?
I mean, it sounds so idealistic, but no, there weren't. It was all, it was all such a dream to work on, and the first time I got a sense of that, other than when we worked on Hushy By, it was a smooth experience. It was a tight ship. That filmed. I wasn't on set for that, but it seemed like it all went pretty smoothly. And then, like I say, I had done the score in advance, and when I got the final the locked edit back, it was just a case of moving a couple of things around, and the draft was like 98% there. I just got a couple of notes back, and so on Sorority, the first time I saw how tight a ship it was when I went along to the shoot for the party scene as an extra. We needed lots of extras, so I went along and was meant to be playing someone 10 years younger than my age, but and horrendously, I've made it into the film dancing at quite a specific scene. If you didn't spot it, that's great, because that means that perhaps no one else will. But I'm in there. So I was on set for that party scene, and God, it was just such a tight ship, and the vibe in the set was, it was so professional. Everyone was just running so smoothly, calmly, and it wasn't like everyone was obviously having fun, to the extent it's like, oh, is everyone taking the mick a little bit with this? But it was almost a sense of everyone was so professional that there was an undercurrent of the joy that was being had there. And so that was my, and I remember saying to James at some point, I think this is all going incredibly smoothly, and he didn't want to admit it. He was so reluctant because he didn't want to jinx it. So that was, I could see how smoothly it was going there. And then my next step was when we got an initial edit in, and I watched that, and I wrote a suite basically with all of the key scenes in there. And I didn't do it to picture, but I did take sort of rough timings from the edit. And those scenes were the opening cue, the scene where they play with the trolley, the beach, the scene where Sarah's journaling about her father, and the final scene. And I sent that off to James, and yeah, pretty much got the nod. Tears were shed, not by James, but by other people, I'm told, and I won't embarrass them. so when you get a response like that, it's like, great, green flag, and you just go. So then I think I had, like, before James heard anything else, there were like 5 or 6 cues pretty much substantially written or presented in such a way that it's like, this could be finished, basically. um and yeah, didn't have a lot of feedback. But I'm not, that's not about me tooting my own horn. That's
Right.
because as a filmmaker, James, just his vision just speaks so clearly, and he wrote the script as well, and he's seen that vision through from start to finish. And the performances, just, the emotion is in those scenes. It's just like, I'd watch it and the music just came. It was like, I'm just empathizing with what's there, and it's all coming to me, and I'm not, key thing is that I wasn't second guessing myself. I wasn't
Right.
sort of thinking maybe I should try a different direction or whatever. I just went with my, first impressions. And and it paid off. So yes, it was a tight ship. And the creative vision was just so clear, from James as a writer and director, down through all of the different departments, and all of the cast. You know, it was a dream. It probably, hopefully that sounds like it was a dream, because that's exactly how it felt to me.
No,
Yeah,
it
yeah.
really does, and it is funny because in a lot of sense the film was like that too. There's obviously conflict throughout and tension and
Mm.
drama, but it's also a very dreamlike, uplifting film too. And so it's funny that, and it's fitting that everything else kind of worked in that same way. But I mean,
Well,
oh, go ahead.
yeah. I mean, all I was going to say is, it's kind of, there's clearly a lot of uplifting elements in the film, but where it really clicked for me was when James used the word bittersweet.
Hmm.
And that was where, that's where everything started to make sense. Because, through all of the turbulence that these sisters have been through with their mother and their father passing away, um they've been together for such a long time, but they're going their separate ways now. And they'll always be sisters, but they'll never be children again. And all of those memories that they've shared together as children, that's it. They're memories now. They've grown up. So that's the sort of the undercurrent that's going through all of this. And that's why it's so heart-wrenching, is that sense of the passage of time, and the sense of things that can't be undone, and the healing that needs to be done. And so that dreamlike quality in the film, the moments where that comes in, and it's also reflected in the score, and the harmony that I used, is this sense of, not quite being grounded, and it's because there it is this great sense of, like, the really deep, mystical, eternal moving of time that we can't stop. And we can't just stay with this moment as long as we would like to. It's always moving, and everything's changing, which is the title of the first cue. That's um so that's there's a lot of healing that goes on in that film between the characters, but there's also stuff that will be lost forever.
Yeah. What I think that's because I was listening to it again earlier today, and I think that balance of having that bittersweet aspect of the characters moving forward, hopefully moving to better things, bettering their lives, further growing up, but then the downsides that come with it, and the drama that's inherent within their
Mm.
career relationship, strikes the balance in the score as well. That it also never gets to the point where it's just like too twee or too saccharine, where you kind of just roll your eyes at it. I mean, like, candidly, I can't stand music like that, and so, like, it. I mean, I'd say it doesn't even like get near the border, So it's a score that, like, I would say focuses on the more positive aspects, but always has that undercurrent throughout. I mean, even in the sisters theme, it's like it keeps that too, and it has that kind of duality.
Yeah, yeah. It's, I mean, we did, there were a couple of those cues where the feedback that I did get was that we had gone a bit too far into the
Mm,
melodrama, and we did have to rein it in a couple of times. Um, you know, and it wasn't far off, but it was, they're such subtle performances that it didn't take much to over egg it. But yeah, I mean, it's a very subtle world to write music for, because we're, you know, these are sort of modest everyday characters. We're in a suburbia of London. You know, the the events that happen are you know, so personal, but they're, you know, we're not in some grand um you know, opera or whatever.
right.
Um there was a lot in terms of the score that it's like, yeah, we can't go too far with this, you know. It defined the instrumentation, you know. It's like, well, this is why it's going to be a fundamentally an intimate score, because a lot of the instrument choices were about reflecting the feminine qualities that were present in the film, but also it's like, with the scenery, as beautifully as it's shot, and as you know, the cinematography in it is fantastic, but we're always dealing with these small suburban kind of settings, so you just can't go too big
Right.
with the score. Yeah, so there was always, it was always being reined in some way. Yeah.
Well, okay. Interesting. I mean, and so then, going back in time a little bit, how did your decision making process go of creating the palette? I mean, was there a time where you thought, oh, maybe I'll go more orchestral, more this way or that way, or was the broader style always in mind, and then it was just figuring out the right pieces?
So there was a certain amount of James and I had a back and forth of different tracks anyway. So we'd been sort of he had a playlist that he'd been putting together for the film. He also had playlists for each of the actors.
Mm,
So they had their own playlist that they would listen to, so they could get into the, you know, understand more about who their character was. And so so there were references that kind of, and I knew anyway, just James's general music tastes, and that, you know, in many ways align with my own. So there was kind of, there's sort of a synergy there that we take for granted, where I didn't feel that I had to um steer too much away from what I would like to do anyway. um and um there were budget considerations as well, so it's like there was never going to be the budget to do something bold and orchestral,
yeah.
but you know, that's not the way around the decision process happened. It was just like, it was, I couldn't imagine a full orchestral score sitting in that world, you know, where we're so close to the characters, and they're the sort of the some of the mundanities of their daily lives, you know, surrounding all of this deep emotional stuff that's going on. And then, as I said, I think just understanding the feminine forces at play in this, not just you know, three female leads, but the movement of emotional baggage and that sort of thing, like the you know, there is the masculine in it, like, and Andrew reflects that in his the hardness of his character, and the way that he tries to control things, um initially anyway, but otherwise it's this sense of time as a healer, and which is a very, you know, feminine kind of energy. So reflecting that in the score, it was like, I was always going to go with piano as something nice and intimate, and a lot of the synth textures in there were also reflecting, you know, sort of softening out the score and adding ambience that way.
And so how do you go about finding or creating those synth textures? Because obviously it's not as simple as going into your room and seeing what instruments are available.
Right. Well, I really enjoy sound design generally. So I tend to just imagine the sound that I want, and I go and make it. And I've got different software synthesizers that it was mostly software. In fact, it was all software synthesizers that I used. Didn't use any hardware for it. And uh, were they? I think they were all completely synthetic as opposed to sort of being based on something sampled. No, there was some sampled stuff actually in there, because there's there's some textures that I made that sort of sound a bit like breaking glass and that kind of thing. And I think I had some kind of sample along those lines that I used. So yeah, it was basically a case of imagining it and then making it. Yeah, without going into the details of
Right.
full sound design 101, I can't really say more than that.
Well, that's fine. I mean, if you did that, I'd be totally lost anyways. So
Yeah.
no worries.
Yeah.
And so this was because I think you actually scored this back in 2019. You'd mentioned. So
Mm.
I don't remember if this is your second or third feature amidst multiple shorts, and I think you actually have a TV pilot coming out too. So
Mm.
was there a bit of I don't want to say learning curve necessarily, but a challenge going from doing a lot of shorts to something that's fuller length?
Yeah, it's a really good question actually. I think this was the first sort of. I had done two other feature length projects, but they weren't. What one was, very indie, in all ways. Although I enjoyed working on it, and another was a bit more. It wasn't typical. It was actually funded by a corporate, and it was like an interactive film, and it was released privately to their customers. So, but it was feature length. And so that was a tight ship as well. But I think this was the first film where, in terms of it was a typical feature film production in terms of the structure of the team, and who was ultimately answered to in terms of the creative vision, and also the love for the story and what we were trying to do. There wasn't sort of um, obviously we were interested in it being a financial success, but we were first and foremost committed to making a really great piece of art. So it was different in that respect to the previous features that I'd worked on. I'm just trying to remember what I did before that. I think it might have been this TV pilot that you mentioned, because that's actually a few years old as well. And both these projects got held up because of COVID
Right.
and other factors. So yeah, I don't. The learning curve, I don't remember. Well, do you know what it was? I think I'd learned some things on that pilot about my process, that I'd managed to make much more efficient.
Mm.
And I don't think I'd done a suite before. I don't think I'd written a suite for a film before. So that, and that was really, it was. I think the primary goal there was about building confidence. So it was like, right here, this is my emotional artistic impression of what's going on here, and here's the sort of, it was one piece of music, but there were distinctly 4 or 5 sections that ultimately became different cues. And what I was looking for was just the green light. Basically, it was just being like, yep, you've got it, you've got the vibe, you've got the story, in a nuanced, detailed
Right.
way, like not an aesthetic way. It's like, yeah, you get it, go. So I think yeah, once I had that, it was kind of smooth going. But we, I was lucky that we didn't have. How long did it take? I was doing some ideas at the end of 2019, but I think most of the scoring was the beginning of
Mm.
2020. And I think for the amount of music that I wrote, I had a generous deadline. So there was that going for me. So it was going back to it being a dream, there was a lot a lot working in my favor. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I was kind of surprised because sometimes when you watch a film, it feels like there isn't a lot of music, and then you know you realize there is, or you see the score release, and it's like, oh, there's actually 40 minutes of music for this 90-minute film. But I think there's when you watch the film, there isn't a ton of music, and
Mm.
the release itself is, or at least the tentative release that you've sent me is relatively short as well, which
Yeah.
I know that a lot of composers you know like writing a lot of music and then they can pare it down, but I I kind of really enjoy those like very just short and sweet releases. I mean, there's a lot, and I don't know what it is. There's a lot of French film composers that will basically release like 10-minute EPs for films, like Rob Couder or Matthew Lambolet, like two great French composers that like release a ton of that, and it's so focused, and
Mm.
it like makes it a joy to listen to. And I think that's something that I'm quite intrigued about when you finally get the green light for the official release as well.
Yeah. As in, you're intrigued about it being how it'll be presented, or what do you
But
mean?
yeah, the presentation, but also just the because and I don't want to say punchy because that's not what the aesthetic is, but having that focus that other scores don't necessarily have because they'll have 50 minutes and 30 minutes of like heavy underscore that isn't necessarily as great of a listening experience.
Mm. Yeah, I see what you mean. Um, yeah, I think there was never that opportunity to write more music because it was just so obvious
Yeah,
where what needed music and what didn't need music. Um, the challenge of it was actually uh, how to really create a substantial personality in the music with so few cues. Or well, maybe not few cues, but I guess total running time being so short. So, and because many of the cues were very short, it's like, well, to what extent? What are the ways that I'm going to establish this personality? And when the cues are really short, how am I going to keep bringing that personality back in? And I listened to the score again this morning, and I realized that there was a lot of conscious decisions being made about that, which might not be obvious to the sort of casual listener. Like there's so much of the harmonic and melodic content appearing just really subtly, just even in two or three notes. And so in the opening cue and the sisters theme, that's where the main sort of motifs and harmonic progressions are really established. But they're appearing on every track in different ways. Even the third cue, where Sarah and Nigel are going out hitting the town. um, I kind of remembered that as being something a bit separate, because it's a completely different. It's
yeah,
sort of branching, it's going into more sort of electronic dance music kind of territory. Um, but there's a lot going on in there that's actually picking from the existing pieces of music. So it was nice listening to that again this morning and sort of thinking that actually maybe it does feel much more part of the whole thing than I realized. And even just at the very beginning, um the first thing that happens on the piano is just these two notes, just the same note hangs twice, and it's a major seventh. And it's just the context that note appears in the piano. It comes back a couple of times. It comes back on the beach when Sarah and Harriet are talking. Just plays a couple of times, and it's like, well, you wouldn't call it, without the context, you wouldn't call a single note on a piano a motif or a melody or anything. But it's there, and it does something, and it feels something, and it brings together um you know uh elements that were there before, and feelings that were there before. And there's stuff like in the last cue, the first two piano chords in the cue are the same chords at the very beginning in the first cue, but they're the opposite way around now, and that's to show that something has fundamentally changed by the end of the score. So that was the challenge from my point of view, was I don't have a huge amount of time to create long memorable melodies or pieces of music. I've got to use all of these micro motifs and things, and I've got to bring them back in such a way that with no expectation that the audience is going to go, oh look, there's that theme again, but they're going to feel the familiarity.
Well, and I think especially with those shorter cues, there's like you still manage a coherence in them where it's not like 45 seconds and then it just ends abruptly. You go, I feel like that should have been 2 or 3 times as long to develop. But it's interesting you mentioning even if the literal melody itself, the audience might not go, oh yeah, I remember that from 15 minutes ago. There will be the sense of familiarity, and it reminded me of what you said a couple minutes before of switching the order of 2 chords to represent that change. I mean, are those the types of things that you have the expectation of the audience to like consciously get, or is it just the aim of like I'm planting these seeds, or they've been hearing and listening and watching this for 85 minutes that somewhere deep down it's going to trigger something?
I think the truth is not as elegant as any of those suggestions. I think it was probably along the lines of, this is a tried and tested method by composers. I'll just wing it and see if this works, kind of thing. I mean, no, maybe I'm being unfair on myself. I think it was. I have done scores where there's a greater variety between the different tracks, and the pilot that I mentioned is perhaps more like that, but that's because it's much more of an ensemble cast. So there's lots of different parties and interests that are being represented. But with Sorority, I think that, well, one of the first things that I do with any film is I think about the film itself as a character. So I'm and I will usually lean towards ultimately writing stuff to represent different people or to represent different themes in the film. The only theme in Sorority that represents an individual character is for Val, for Kate Dickie, their mother. And it doesn't appear in such a way that it's obvious, but there's I think the way around that it happened was there was she has a theme that plays when she's watching. I don't know if I want to spoil anything, but anyway, towards the end, that she has a theme that plays, and track 5, just before the trolley scene. I extrapolated those elements and turned it into more of a melody there. So that's her theme, and it's so subtle that you wouldn't say this is her theme. But yes, so I tend to, on projects, I go in by thinking about, well, what's the general, if I was to write a piece of music that sums up the film as a whole, how am I going to do that? So there was that consideration, and then there were themes written for the love between them as sisters, and then there was a theme written for the passing of time, which is the changes theme, which is the first melody that plays. I've lost track of your question and what I'm talking about.
That's fine. But interesting, and so I think that even accidentally, you may have subconsciously answered it or addressed it too. Um,
Right. We were talking about, like, how consciously there was that it was all coherent, and
yeah.
yeah, I think because of the nature of the film, it just dictated what the score was going to do. For the same reasons that there's not loads of score, those are the same reasons that there is a coherent thread from track to track. Because I don't know, that's just the way it feels. That's the way the film feels. And if I was to write lots of different pieces of music, I just don't think that as an audience member that you would really be there with the characters on their journey. Um, and some scenes going back to the third cue with Sarah and Niger going out, it was just the nature of it that it had to be different. But then I tried to blend that with the next cue where we start off in this more sort of electronic kind of world, and then we go back into the strings and the piano and things.
Interesting. But I think, and this might be a bit of an unfair question because it's big and abstract. But earlier you had mentioned, when you gave the suite to James, that he was like, gave you the green light, said not just the palette, but you've got the story. And so, where do you think the purpose of film music falls in with the context of a film?
Well, Nick, that's a very big and abstract question.
I warned you. I warned you.
So say that again. Where does the
Yeah, where does film music fall, within a film? What do you think that its purpose is, and when you're approaching something, what are you trying to do with the music itself?
well, I think that lots of composers would agree with the statement that the music is there to score the inner world. It's there to tell the audience what's going on inside the characters, and I think that's uh, when I meet a composer that's just starting out, like a student or something, you know straight away in the music that they're writing whether they get that or they don't.
Hmm.
And I don't know if that's a matter of empathy, as in it's a matter of how you're made up as a human. That you're either destined to become a film composer or you're not, on the basis of can you actually empathize with what's going on the inside of these characters. So I would say that is one fundamental purpose. Um, I did have a friend kind of challenge me recently, um, in a sort of a cheeky kind of way, because we were discussing some scores that had taken us out of a film recently. And my criticism was to say, well, a score should be helping you settle into the film and into the world of the characters. And all he did was just raise the question, well, should it? And that was very interesting, just to be like, well, okay, what would a different experience of a film be if the music was deliberately trying to take you out, or it was trying to just I don't know, give you a different access point to the story? Because we're so used to film, sorry, to film music doing the former of those processes, where a great score, you're not really aware of it most of the time because you're so absorbed in the story. But I wonder if it's reasonable to compare that to the fact that naturalistic acting is only a recent phenomenon, and we've come to take that for granted. But then you have people, as much flack as he gets, like what Nicolas Cage is said to be doing is actually trying to push acting out into some other kind of territory, something perhaps more archetypal or whatever. And you watch a lot of Nic Cage's performances, and they kind of take you out of the film. But if you came to it with a different attitude, and you weren't looking for realism, you were looking for some kind of sense of drama that was more, um, you know, just different, and wasn't meant to reflect reality in some way, in the way that musicals perhaps are not meant to reflect reality. I used to hate musicals because I was like, well, that's not how life happens. No one bursts into song. And it took me a while to switch my mindset and actually enjoy them in that respect. So going back to your original question, I think the vast majority of film composers believe that and work from the point of view that you are there to support the story, support the actors, and help the audience get absorbed in that, and on the much deeper level, give them ideas of what's going on, and a sense of where we might be going in the story. So a sense of the music has this intuition that's just a little bit ahead of the audience. It's like it has a little bit of foreknowledge about what's happening. We're being teased about the things that are going on, but it's not screaming, this is what's happening. And actually in the case of this film I was discussing with the friend recently, my feeling with the score was that it was kind of screaming, this is what's happening. Yeah.
Well, and that's where I think the saying that you hear quite often is that like a good film score is one that you don't notice. That is, I think, often taken far too literally. Like if that was the case, film music would just be drones and nothing else. But yeah, there really is that balance of it being noticeable enough without bashing you over the head. Because I mean, you take some of the most iconic themes, like you take like the theme for Jaws or something. Every time that comes on, like you notice it immediately and you know exactly what it means. It's interesting because when I was talking with Harry Gregson Williams a few weeks ago, he was also mentioning a recent score that like very much took him out. So I don't know, maybe you two were talking about the same one. But
maybe
it's interesting, but and I think with the Nic Cage aspect too. I mean, like I always chalk some of his style to just being in shitty movies, and if he was acting like everybody else, it would like disappear into the ether and no one would ever think about it. But also the fact that like a lot of his movies are just like don't feel quite real. There's often a strange surreal element to it, and I think that kind of brings it out. And whether you can draw a 1-to-1 parallel to film music with some aspects, I don't know. I'm not
well,
smart enough
maybe
to
what
answer
we
that
need
question.
maybe what we need is a Nic Cage film where he's not the only actor that's exploring that style of acting, and maybe it would start to make more sense then. I think often he's so juxtaposed with the way that everyone else is performing that yeah, he seems really caricatured. And just because I find that assessment of Nicolas Cage very interesting. And the first time I heard it was when Ethan Hawke defended him and actually said, quite specifically, he's the only actor that's trying to do something. He's trying to push acting into new territory. But I think I read even Nic Cage saying it explicitly recently. So I don't think I've watched that many Nic Cage films since I became aware that this might be the case. The only one I saw not too long ago was Mandy, which was fantastic and seemed like it was it was great. The first half was great. I think it kind of lost its way a bit later on, but it felt like it was written for Nicolas Cage, and I couldn't believe that it wasn't actually. But so that's the there's several of his films. Pig's got lots of good reviews. I've been wanting to watch that.
That's an interesting one because I actually think he's much more restrained in that, and I think it being Nic Cage and it seeming like because I saw it around when it came out, so I hadn't heard much of it. So I thought it was going to be like a Nic Cage revenge movie, and what you get is utterly different. So that's an interesting one because he's, there's some of what we know of as Nic Cage in there, but it's not, it's not him in like from Vampire's Kiss, running and screaming the whole time.
Yeah, I've only watched clips of Vampire's Kiss, and is that the one where he recites the alphabet at some point to
I
somebody?
It might be. I haven't seen that in a long
Yeah,
time. All the one that always comes to mind is, I think there's an image that's always circulating of him wearing plastic vampire's teeth, and then like the
yeah.
famous clip is him running through, I think, Manhattan, just screaming, "I'm a vampire" over and over.
Well, like this is penetrating drama that we're talking about here. I mean, I need to see Wild at Heart. That's I haven't seen that. I've seen and I went through a big David Lynch phase where I was like
Mm.
just watching all of his stuff, and Wild at Heart was one that I didn't watch, and that's meant to be one of Nic Cage's best performances.
Yeah, I
I
haven't
you
seen
know
that,
it's
that is a great one of his. And again, like, you know, David Lynch as a director isn't creating like a world that we recognize as one to our world either. So it fits a
yeah,
little more in that.
yeah. But yeah, but going back to music in that respect, there's so much amazing experimental stuff going on in film scoring today, and I think we've seen a huge shift in the way that, particularly TV. I think TV scores have really kind of shifted the rules over the last 10 years. So there's a lot of experimentation going on in terms of the way music is structured, the way sound design is used, the way that the palettes that are used, and all of that kind of stuff. But I think everyone is still taking for granted that we're there to serve the story, and we're there
Mm.
to help the audience get absorbed. So maybe that's because we've tried other things and we worked out that's what's best to do. But it's just a fascinating question to kind of leave hanging in the air, like, well, what could be the other approaches? Actually, what comes to mind um, is stuff that crosses the fourth wall, and it's not so much a musical um, reference point, but the film Barbarian Sound Studio. Did you see that a
A
few
while
years
ago,
ago?
but yeah. Yeah, I
Yeah,
don't want to say a while, like
and
I don't want to say a long time ago because it's not like it's that old of a film, but yeah,
yeah, where it was like 10, was it 10 years ago, something like
something
that.
like that.
It's
Yeah.
it's getting on. um but there's some stuff in that where it crosses the fourth wall, and the sound design all goes in with that, and that's I love stuff like that really just messes with the listener. And I've tried doing that with music, not for film,
Mm.
where there's just stuff that kind of catches you out and stuff. And I like when I first started hearing binaural recordings, and you could hear stuff moving around you,
Yeah.
and coming right up to your ear, and that kind of thing. And that was fascinating. But it's such an intense experience, and you're so present to the music and sound itself that it doesn't necessarily go hand in hand with film. But the more that VR takes off, if we're getting uh, more sort of VR stories happening, where you can have a cinematic experience in VR, there might be opportunities for music to do something interesting there.
Interesting. Yeah, see, I didn't. So honestly, I've been very dismissive of like VR and AR and that sort of thing, because I was like, it's been around for a few years, and I'm always like, well, when what's the point of this? But that's actually a very interesting observation that I think really, I don't know, maybe it does have some legs.
I had an experience a few years ago where I went to some expo, and one of the stalls there, they had a VR experience, and it was a short film.
Hmm.
And it mostly took place inside a car, and you were in one of the seats, and you could move your head around, and you could see different things that were happening. And it the it made a real impact on me. And one of the reasons it made an impact on me is that my girlfriend at the time wasn't really into, I generally didn't think she would be into VR and computer games and that kind of thing. But this felt like a different way that we could
Hmm.
share a cinematic experience. And it was just a simple thing, like, you're in this, in inverted commas, film, and one of you sees something that the other doesn't, and you say, hey, look over here. And it's like, if you're there with a friend or a partner or someone, close to you, and you're sharing this experience together, and you're actually interacting with each other to influence the experience, that was when I was like, right, this can be something really exciting. And that was like 7 or 8 years ago
Oh wow.
now. And we've got so many more, we've got loads more VR games, but I haven't seen much more in the way of cinematic experiences. So I think, yeah, I think there's opportunities there, but it's just difficult. I think it's the same reason we don't see that many Cloverfields, for example,
Yeah.
because you can do first person found footage in certain ways, and Cloverfield is an amazing example of that. And if 3D had really taken off at that time, that would have been an absolutely intense film to watch. But there's not that many stories that maybe lend themselves to that kind of experience.
Yeah. Or I mean, you know, people often try to do that experience, and it it immediately feels inauthentic because you go, well, no, it just doesn't. That doesn't make sense from the perspective of the story for that to be happening. But
Yeah, yeah,
I, and I think that that's been the issue with VR is it working its way towards the threshold of a more mass adoption of it, to where then there'll be an explosion of things being made. And yeah, I mean that concept's really interesting, because then you imagine the music side of things is going to have to require, maybe not an entirely different mindset, but a different one than what we have for a normal, straightforward, like 2 hour linear narrative. So that will
yeah.
be. All right. 10 minutes ago, I had no interest in this. Now I'm very
You're
intrigued.
sold.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
But all right. On that note, because now I'm gonna spend the next 20 minutes looking this stuff up. Um,
Uh,
but on that note, I think we can wrap up. Derek, again, I'm so glad that you could join me today. It was a pleasure talking about sorority, and then, you never know what conversation is going to veer off into Nic Cage, but I think it always makes for a better one.
I try and bring Nic Cage into every conversation. Well, thank you, Nick. It's been an absolute pleasure. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I appreciate it. I'm glad I didn't keep you too long, and hopefully you don't have an issue making your dinner reservation.
No, I'll be absolutely fine. Thank you.